Thank you. Hello, everyone. Can everybody hear me? No? I can be louder if you want. Cool. So I'm super excited to be, one of the closing talks here today. And we've spent 2 days talking about DevOps, and I want to take a little bit of time to talk about some myths. So a little bit about me. For those of you that didn't come to my talk earlier, I'm Seth Vargo. That's my Twitter and GitHub handle. So if you ever want to reach out, feel free to mention me. You can direct message me. I have those open, and you can also mention me on GitHub. So I've been in the tech industry for a long time, but I've been in the quote-unquote DevOps industry since about 2011, 2012. So originally, I started at a company called Custom Ink. How many people have heard of Custom Ink? They make T-shirts. Primarily a US-based company, but they're responsible for a very large percentage of all the T-shirt screen printing that happens in America. I worked on the web operations team there. That's where I first got exposed to this idea of DevOps. We actually sat in the same room as developers. But I did more operations things. I did a lot of SSHing into servers, a lot of Chef code. About a year later, I went and worked at Chef. So I learned Chef at Custom Ink, and then I went to work for Chef. How many people have heard of Chef? Cool. So for those of you that haven't, Chef is kind of one of the companies that pioneer the DevOps movement. They make a configuration management tool called Chef, ironically. They used to be called Opscode. I actually worked at Opscode for a little bit, and then they changed their name. And at Chef, I not only worked on the core product, but I worked on a lot of the community tooling. So I'm the author of Chef Spec. I'm on the core team for Bergshelf. I wrote Chef Sugar. A lot of core projects to the Chef community. I spent a brief amount of time as a consultant where I was on site with a lot of really big organizations, people like General Electric, big organizations like Discover Financial Services. And I got exposed to a lot of the way that organizations work, both big and small. And most recently, I joined an amazing team at HashiCorp. How many people have heard of HashiCorp? So we make DevOps tooling, if you want to give it a word. So if you haven't heard of HashiCorp, you might have heard of like Vagrant, Packer, Surf, Consul, Terraform, or most recently, Vault. So these are all tools that we manufacture. They're all free, and they're all open source, all the sources available on GitHub. So why did I give you my whole life story while starting since I graduated from college? Because I've worked in a number of organizations as a consultant or an employee, and I've seen the various definitions of DevOps. And I like to think that I was part of that movement as much as possible. And I also like to think that the definition is changing. So let's talk about that. So when I say myth, what do I mean? So some people think myth and they think like a big elaborate story. What I'm really talking about are the 10 things here that I think they're misconceptions. I think they're misunderstandings of what DevOps is. And some of that's influenced by recruiters, marketing agencies who are taking the word and making it something that fits their agenda. So I want to talk about what DevOps really is. So the first myth is that you can hire a DevOps for your organization. So how many people in this room have the word DevOps somewhere in their title? Okay, so we have a few. It's actually quite common. But it turns out that you actually can't hire a DevOps to fix your organization. So I was at Devops Days Minneapolis, and I'll talk about the Devops Days conferences in a little bit, but a girl by the name of Catherine Daniels, she works for Etsy now, gave a really amazing talk called DevOps is Dead, Long Live DevOps. And the whole purpose of that talk, the whole content, the basis of that talk was that what we know and love of DevOps, the originating pattern and passion, is changing. And she uses a hype cycle to talk about that. So the next slides I didn't actually make. I borrowed them from her talk. So all credit goes to her. But how many people have heard of the Gartner hype cycle? It looks like this. And effectively, the Gartner hype cycle is a way to analyze the hype or the life cycle of a technology, whether that's software or hardware. And it kind of goes like this. So at some point, there's a trigger. So if we look at Docker, right, the trigger for Docker was this amazing, pour outreach from the community where everybody was using Docker. There was a trigger, there were some really great talks, and all of a sudden, everybody wants to use Docker. And then we reach the peak of inflated expectations. And that's where you hear all these great things, right? DevOps is amazing, it's going to fix all your problems, it's the panacea for your organization. And you reach this peak, but then you realize that it was all a lie. And this is the trough of disillusionment. This is the point where the hype hasn't met your expectations. You were misinformed, you misunderstood, the tool didn't meet what it said it could, or the hardware didn't meet what it said it could. And then finally, there's the slope of enlightenment, where you realize that, okay, it doesn't meet 100% of what it said it could. My inflated expectations cannot possibly be met. But I'm okay with that. And eventually you level out onto the plateau of productivity, which is where you can actually use the tool. And then the way this works is there's Gartner hype cycles for an individual. So you have a Gartner hype cycle. Your personal hype cycle is very different from everyone else in your organization, other people in the technology industry. You may immediately reach the plateau of productivity, and your distance between these peaks may be different. But Gartner collects all of that information and publishes the aggregate result for technology every year. So the way it usually works, like I said, is there's a trigger, and I'm going to use Docker as an example. So there's a trigger, this stuff's amazing, and then you move on to these inflated expectations. And this is where, right now, where we are in Docker land, where we think Docker is going to solve every problem. I need a haircut. Well, you should use Docker. I don't think Docker is going to cut your hair for you. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who think it's a panacea, it's going to solve all the problems. But then you reach the trough of disillusionment. And unfortunately, sometimes this comes at a very big expense. You've already deployed all of this stuff to production, and you realize that it has a massive bug. I think Windows was a really big victim of this maybe 10 to 15 years ago, where Windows was really great, but then you went to deploy it to production, and it turns out it cost you $1 million a year to manage and run Windows in production. And all of a sudden, you're moving on to the slope of enlightenment, where you figure out exactly what you need it for, you adjust the technology to fit the problem, and then you can move on to productivity. So where do you think we are on the hype cycle with DevOps? How many people think we're still at the trigger phase? Okay, how many people think we're at the inflated expectations phase? Okay, how many people think we're heading to the trough of disillusionment? All right, what about the enlightenment slope? Okay, and how many people think we're productive? How many people didn't raise their hand? Okay, all right, cool. This is an interactive presentation. It's the end of the day. I'm trying to get you guys excited. So I think we're here. And I'll explain why. I think we're over the peak of inflated expectations, but I don't think we've quite reached the trough of disillusionment. And we're definitely nowhere near the plateau of productivity. And it's a little bit weird to apply a software hype cycle to an abstract concept like DevOps. How many people have ever Googled LinkedIn DevOps? I did, for the purposes of getting a screenshot so I could show you. How many results do you think there are for LinkedIn DevOps? Correct, someone said it. There's 1.6 million results for LinkedIn DevOps. There are more results for DevOps than seconds I've been alive. Think about that. And we get some really amazing titles here. We get the top 25 DevOps profiles. There's a dedicated LinkedIn page. Look at that URL. It's /title/DevOps. We get DevOps jobs. It's a specific job category. We get DevOps, a post by the LinkedIn engineering team themselves on their blog. DevOps wasn't coined until around 2009 by Patrick Dubois. So we have a field that is roughly 5 to 6 years old, has 1.6 million results for job titles on LinkedIn. Let's compare that to this. So the systems administrator field, or the operator field, has been around for 30 to 40 years. It's a much more seasoned profession. How many results do you think there are for this? 2,000? 200. That's a little low. There are 400,000 results. Almost 485. So about a third the number of results. 1.6, 4.3. This is where it gets interesting. There's only 24 sysadmin jobs. I'm just saying. So there's a third as many search results using the exact same keywords. There's one fewer top profile. Yet it's a profession that's 30 years older and more mature. So why? Well, it's because the hype is over. Or there never was a hype for sysadmins. But we're taking the word DevOps and we're shoving it into every title because it sells. Because recruiters love it, organizations think they need it, so they're using it. I have seen companies post DevOps marketing opportunities. It's literally the same job description as a marketing person, the exact same requirements. They only put the word DevOps in the title because everybody's trying to get a piece of the pie. Everybody's trying to get into the hype before we hit the trough of disillusionment, before everybody realizes that it's all a lie. Sorry. So DevOps, at its purest definition, is 2 or more organizational units working together peacefully for a common success criteria. This is the definition of DevOps. It's working together. That's it. It doesn't involve being on call. It doesn't involve writing production-ready code. It involves being open and honest to listening to other ideas, providing your own ideas, and working in a team. But many organizations are mistaking operations for DevOps. The old sysadmin brand title is being rebranded as DevOps, but that's really not what it is. So in the pure definition, a DevOps engineer or DevOps workflow engineer would be responsible for ensuring that 2 or more organizational units communicate with each other. That would be the job of a DevOps. If you are a DevOps, your job is to make sure that other people talk to each other. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because we already have those people. They're called managers. So I want to end this myth with 2 more things. This is the job posting profile for Etsy. How many people have ever heard of Etsy? Etsy is kind of one of the top DevOps companies. They're idolized. They speak at Velocity every year. John Allspaw is considered one of the fathers of DevOps. How many times do you see the word DevOps on their job posting? This is Facebook. How many times do you see the word DevOps on their job postings? They're not hiring DevOps engineers because they're too busy implementing DevOps best practices. Let's move on. So kind of related is myth number 2, which is that DevOps is going to solve all your problems. DevOps is the panacea for every problem in your organization. So let's have a conversation. So this is Bill, and that's Janet. I actually don't know who they are. I made those names up. And Janet is really upset because production went down last night. And Bob, or Bill, I forget what I named him, says, we just need better DevOps. It doesn't work like that. You can't just slap some DevOps on it. You can't just rub a little DevOps on it and make it all better. It's not a magical fairy potion. This is what I call buzzword application disorder. This is where you inappropriately apply a buzzword because you think it makes sense and it doesn't. Or because you've been misinformed about what the buzzword actually means. You can shorten this acronym to BAD if you really pay attention. So, to put it another way, had this conversation gone differently, had Janet come in and said, your whole team quit, I don't think Bill would answer, yeah, we just need better DevOps. And if Janet came in and said, you have early male pattern baldness, I don't think Bill would say, yeah, we just need better DevOps. It's not a panacea. You can't just rub a little Agile on it and make it all better. You can't rub DevOps on it. You can't rub Chef on it. You can't rub Ruby on it, Puppet, whatever you're doing. You can't change process with technology. You can improve it, but you can't change it. Process change is very different. And people play a very important role. So I want to tell a story. I was interviewing with a company, and I was interviewing for a DevOps position. And I was really against it at first, and I went to the interview anyway. And I started talking with them, and the president of the company was the one interviewing me, and he was talking about what they need and their shortcomings, and was kind of asking for advice while interviewing me at the same time. And he said, well, we have no on-call rotation. I said, okay. Well, we don't have any monitoring. I said, okay. It's like, our developers just deploy whenever they want. Like, okay. We really need this thing called chat ops. I was like, okay. And he continued to throw some more buzzwords at me, and what I realized was that they just don't have an operations team. They ran everything in EC2 and let EC2 manage all of their things, and finally they got to a scale where they needed a human being to manage those resources. So I flat out told him, I said, you're not looking for a DevOps engineer. Because if you want me to come in here and get your developers and your operations team to work together, you have to give me an operations team. And you don't have that right now. So what I did instead was I helped him change the job description to still be sexy, because system administrator is not sexy, but remove the word DevOps and target exactly what he was looking for. And they hired someone 3 days later who wasn't a DevOps, but was a person who is skilled at administering systems. So you don't need the buzzword to be successful, but you do need DevOps practices to be successful. But if all your employees hate one another, rubbing a little DevOps on it isn't going to fix anything. And if your water cooler is broken, implementing DevOps doesn't fix your water cooler. It's the same concept. It's not a panacea. It's a requirement, and you should definitely do it. But sometimes you have bigger problems, and they might even be identified by the switch to DevOps. So if you have really bad interpersonal relationships between two people on a team, and you start forcing DevOps practices, those are going to stick out like a light bulb because you're forcing those people to work together. So keep that in mind, that sometimes it's like implementing DevOps is actually going to reveal more problems than they solve. And that's okay. You should do it anyway. This is one of my favorite myths. You can be certified in DevOps. How many people are certified in DevOps? I can't see because there's a light in my face, but I have brought with me here today the DevOps certification exam. It's kind of hard to read, so I'll read it for you. It says, I have attended and passed with a C or better, either the first or second grade of elementary school. So how many people would say that they have passed with a C or better the first or second year of elementary school? Yeah, I would hope so. That'd be weird. So we're just going to go ahead and circle yes. And it turns out that that's all you need. It's an A+. You passed. You're all DevOps certified. I will get you your certificates in the future. The only difference between the second grade and the technology industry is the size of the toys we play with. Think about it. The only difference is the size of the toys and how much they cost. So when and where did we lose our willingness and desire to work with others? What changed? So in elementary school, it's highly collaborative. You color together, you play blocks together, you paint together, you make messes together, you run around on the playground together. You make immediate friends with people. You don't look at someone and immediately judge them and say, oh, they can't be my friend because they use PHP. You don't do that. Second graders don't even write PHP. But this is what we do in secondary education. It happens around 7th or 8th grade. We force isolation. We encourage isolation. You can't work with other people. We can't adequately measure you if you're working in a team. We need to treat you like an individual. We're actively discouraged from working with other people in secondary and post-secondary education. Even worse, sometimes we're quantified and then ranked by some type of standardization which only encourages unhealthy competition. So we rank people by their test scores. We rank people by their project scores. And then we post those publicly so that we can drive competition. So you spend 5 years of your childhood learning to play nice with others and share the crayons, and then you hit middle school, and all of a sudden it's all about who has the biggest pack of crayons. Do you have the 10,000 color pack? Because I have the 20,000 color pack. And unfortunately, that's not easily unlearned behavior. It's very easy to learn to work with others. It's very easy to learn to work in isolated environments. It's very difficult to switch. And when we talk about DevOps, DevOps is about communicating and sharing ideas. It's about collaboration. So that directly conflicts with what we learn in high school and post-secondary education, like college or university. I went to a very technical school, and it wasn't until my senior year that I ever worked with another human being on a project. I wrote all my code alone in my dorm room or apartment on my laptop. And you all know that that's not how the real world works. You work in teams, you communicate, there's code review. You don't have that in college. You don't get that. So it should come as no surprise that if the generation that we currently have of software engineers is going through that same process, that they're also not going to know how to work with others. So this is my favorite quote, and I'm going to quote myself. If you need a certificate that says you play well with others, I think you have bigger problems than a bullet point on your resume. If you really, really need to tell people that you play nicely with others, I think you have a bigger problem. So I made myself a certificate that says I play nice with others. This is the actual AWS certificate of training, whatever. And all of the next 2 slides are both copyright AWS and Amazon and its affiliates. Because this is the third question on the exam, which is a little difficult to read. I'll start reading it. So it says, write the script to call the EC2 create volume API, tag the Amazon EBS volume with the current date time group, and then use the EC2 copy snapshot API to back up the new Amazon EBS volume using the EC2 describe snapshot API to enumerate. So basically, if you scrub out all the bullshit, this is all you have. Is you have EC2 Amazon, EC2 Amazon, EC2, EC2 Amazon. So you heard it here. In order to be a DevOps, you have to use EC2, which is total bullshit. But Amazon wants you to believe that. And that's because, as we talked about earlier, it's becoming a sales and marketing funnel. It's becoming a way for companies to make money or hire people. So you can't be certified in DevOps because you already are. And if you ever go work for an organization that says, oh, can you just go get certified, it's probably not the best place to work. Because it means that they don't get it. They don't understand DevOps. If they want you to be certified in DevOps, they don't get it. Myth number 4. This is a short one. DevOps is using Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Salt, whatever the new configuration management hotness is. So some of the original pioneers of the DevOps movement actually started in the configuration management circle. We have people like Patrick Dubois, Luke Kanies, Adam Jacob, Andrew Clay Schaefer, John Vincent, John Willis, some other people I haven't pictured up here. They're kind of the fathers of DevOps, if you will. They've written the blog posts. They're the go-to followers on Twitter for anything DevOps related. And I think we do owe them a thank you because we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are today without them. The problem is that their association with those tools, like Puppet and Chef specifically, make it appear that you must be using these configuration management tools to be doing DevOps right. But that's not true. You don't actually need configuration management for DevOps. It certainly helps, the same way that a Band-Aid helps a severed arm, but it's not a requirement. And I'm not saying you shouldn't use configuration management. What I'm saying is that it's not part of DevOps. The idea of working together and communicating in a team isn't something that's influenced by the way you lay down production templates or start a web server. They're completely unrelated ideas. So while we should definitely appreciate the support that these companies like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Salt have, the donations they provide, the sponsors for conferences, et cetera, DevOps is not actually affiliated with any one company. It's not owned by anyone. Myth number 5 is that DevOps is just for engineers and operators. And this is an interesting one because it originally wasn't a myth. In the original keynote, when Patrick got on stage and proposed this idea of having developers and operations people work together, that was it. It was DevOps. We got developers, the people who write code, operations people, the ones who run it in production. We're going to make them talk to one another. And the word DevOps is the conglomerate of those two words. And then John Allspaw got on stage with Paul Hammond at Velocity 2009. They talked about how they deploy 10 times a day at Flickr, and it was all about DevOps, the cooperation between their development teams and their operations team. And all of a sudden, it was a big boom. And originally, DevOps was created to bridge the gap that existed between engineers and operators. Because engineers, they worked in the office, close to management, close to business owners, close to decision makers. And operators worked very far away, spent a lot of time at the data center, spent a lot of time away from management, away from decision makers, yet they were also a critical piece of the business. And they had a lot of experience making applications run in production. So putting them together seemed like a no-brainer until someone finally said it. But organizations began to realize that DevOps principles, the fundamentals of DevOps, extend far beyond the engineering teams themselves. They extend into marketing. They extend into sales. They extend into QA, consulting, management, leadership, and even the end customer. So originally, the definition of DevOps kind of looked something like this. It was a bridge between the development and operations team. But many organizations are finding that it looks more like this. It spans the whole organization horizontally. But even this is a bad diagram, because DevOps here is kind of pictured as its own team. It should really look like this. It should be horizontal and cross-cutting throughout the entire organization. You shouldn't have a person telling marketing to talk to the operations team. It should just happen. And there are a lot of tools that make this happen. Things like unified company chat, email, great tools for cross-team communication. DevOps should be unilaterally applied across the organization. DevOps is about breaking down organizational silos. So by creating a DevOps team, you have added one silo instead of eliminating all of them. Myth number 6, DevOps is going to conferences. This is awkward. So you're at a DevOps conference. I go to DevOps conferences. Sometimes I even speak at them. I actually run a DevOps conference in Pittsburgh called DevOps Days Pittsburgh. And they're great. How many people are having a good time? There's more than like one person having a good time. I promise. DevOps Days conferences are the best environment for learning and collaboration. And after being in Atmosphere for the past 30 or so hours, I think it's also one of the best conferences for learning, collaboration, and understanding industry best practices. If you go on Lanyard, you can see there are a number of DevOps conferences. There are, in fact, 113 DevOps conferences that occurred in the year 2014. Internationally, globally. That's a lot of conferences. These conferences are super important. It's the way we spread ideas, right? It's a lot like TED. I find the DevOps conferences mirror TED conferences a lot. Because people don't get on stage and show some code and live demo things. They share ideas. And TED's motto is ideas worth sharing. And I think that's super important. Because when someone gets on stage and shows you this super isolated demo of this one thing that worked for them this one time, you can't really apply that to your organization. But if someone gives you an idea is one of the most beautiful things. Because you can choose to ignore it and do nothing, or you can choose to adopt it and do something, or you can choose to change it and do something. You can take all, part, or none of it and do whatever you want with it. And conferences provide an amazing avenue for that to happen. But an organization can implement successful DevOps practices without ever setting foot in an auditorium or conference center. You can do this without being here, which is weird because you wouldn't know that you can do this without being here unless you were here. But you can do this without being here. But you should still go to DevOps conferences. But don't think that you have to go to conferences to implement better DevOps. But you should, because they are incredibly valuable. In fact, I hear this Atmosphere conference is really good. Myth number 7, DevOps is using the cloud. How many people use the cloud? Yeah. Let's talk about the cloud. So when the user thinks about a cloud, this is what they think about. That thing you see from the airplane window. It's fluffy. If you didn't know it was composed of water, you would lay on it. A more technical user, this is kind of what they think of as cloud. iCloud, Microsoft SkyDrive, Kindle Cloud, Google Drive. They get it. It's like a thing where they don't have to worry about it. And that's all they really know. And then we have developers, and this is kind of what developers think of the cloud, which is it's servers, and they're in the cloud. Duh. And then we have operators, and this is what they know the cloud to be. And we laugh because it's true. And it's so funny that...
What is the cloud?
You guys can hear this.
It's scalable. It's elastic. It's servers, databases, and hard drives. but it's bound in physical data centers. We're going to unveil something that completely changes the way you think about cloud. You know public cloud, and you may know private cloud, and you might even know about hybrid clouds and marketing clouds and elastic clouds. But today, now, there's actual cloud.
Introducing Google Actual Cloud Platform.
This is the world's first cloud offering running on servers in the troposphere, inside actual clouds.
It's faster, it's more scalable, it's more secure. And most importantly, it looks like a real cloud.
We're also releasing an industry-first performance feature, Storm Boost.
Storm Boost draws on the power of Mother Nature to give your persistent disks a 50% IOPS boost during thunderstorms.
And you can predict storage performance right from the developer's console by monitoring our new weather dashboard.
Or you could just look out the window.
Google Actual Cloud Platform is the culmination of groundbreaking scientific research on super-cooled water droplets, technological breakthroughs in high-altitude, ultra-low pressure chip design, and operational efficiencies related to the way we run non-terrestrial data centers.
I sleep more soundly knowing that my data is 30,000 feet above the ground.
I just love that I can see it.
This is the first step in an exciting journey. People say the sky's the limit, but we think bigger.
The clouds are so pretty.
That's not just a cloud, honey. That's Google Actual Cloud Platform.
Okay.
So it's so funny that Google made it their April Fool's joke this year, because nobody knows what the cloud actually is. And your definition of the cloud is very different than my definition or the person next to you's definition, and it may change tomorrow. So you might think that you need a cloud to be doing the DevOps, but a public, private, virtualized anything is not actually a requirement to implement DevOps practices. There are companies that I can't name who run on bare metal and process credit card data, and they have DevOps practices. They're required to run on bare metal because of hardware and security compliance, but they can implement DevOps practices, and their code has never set foot on EC2 or AWS. Even mainframe operators can DevOps, if you're still a mainframe operator. So myth number 8. DevOps is doing the same things as Etsy, Facebook, GitHub, Google, whoever you want to, anthropomorphize here. So let's go through some things. We should use Rails because GitHub did. We should write our statsd service in Node.js because Etsy did. We should use PHP because Facebook did. Or my personal favorite, we should start with a Rails app and then migrate to a highly distributed multi-tiered Scala-based SOA after a year because Failwhale did. Does it sound crazy? Because it should. DevOps is not conforming to the norm. It's defining it. So these companies that we idolize, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Etsys, the GitHubs, they're successful because they did what worked for them at the time. They weren't using existing technologies because they knew they wouldn't work. They thought to the future, not to the present, and they dared to facilitate change. And then they were nice enough to get on a stage and tell us about it. But unless you're running one of the world's largest social networks or one of the world's largest online marketplaces, you don't have the same problems as Facebook or Etsy. If your average server load is less than 1% and your average user base is 100 unique visits per month, you don't have scale problems. You don't need the same level of integrated monitoring that someone like Etsy has. And while it'd be great to play with those tools and have that awesome sauce, sometimes it's important to take a step back and figure out, what do we actually need? How many people know who this guy is? Cool. Well, his name is Abraham Maslow, and he wrote a book called The Psychology of Science. How many people have heard of the book? Cool. Well, you're about to hear a quote from the book that I'm sure you've all heard, and it's very true, and it's this. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And we're in this right now with DevOps. All of the myths thus far have kind of proven that. DevOps is our hammer. So everything looks like a nail. We're trying to fix everything with DevOps. But at the end of the day, you can't pound a screw in with a nail. You need a screwdriver or a cordless drill. So while we can learn from the successes of these organizations and failures, they like to talk about what didn't work, DevOps is ultimately doing what's best for your organization and its individual members. And that concept of best is very abstract. It's not necessarily the same for the company that's one office building above you or down the road. They may be in a completely different problem space. DevOps is a lot of thinking and reflecting on the part of the C-level executives and upper management. You need to figure out what works best for your company. And sometimes that means trial and error. But it's important to be open and honest with your employees and say, hey, we're going to try out this thing and it may not work. Make sure you give us feedback. And it turns out that conversation right there is already DevOps. You've opened a line of communication between your C-level executives and your employees. If this isn't working, let me know. So myth number 9. DevOps is using cool new technologies like Node.js, Ruby, or Go instead of old antiquated technologies like C, Scheme, or Java. Let's define the programming hipster. So the programming hipster, as defined by the authority on all definitions, Urban Dictionary, is as follows. A software programmer that probably writes Ruby, JavaScript, or some other popular but nonetheless probably crap language. Typically more artsy-fartsy types than the actual computer scientists, millennial generation, street clothing at all times, hardware stack is entirely Apple-based, high concentrations exist in Snorth Street of London and the Bay Area of San Francisco. And then, of course, they use it in a sentence. So they say, I went to a software conference last week, and there were so many programming hipsters there talking about their shitty dynamically typed languages. The type of language you choose, the stack that you run, doesn't matter. And I think that's best illustrated by the last myth. Etsy and Facebook are primarily PHP. GitHub is Rails. Google is Google. Google is primarily Python and Go. Those are completely different languages. Google runs a massive internal Kubernetes stack. Etsy runs like etcd and some other things. They're completely different, yet they're all regarded as successful companies. So don't think that because you're the Haskell shop that you can't implement DevOps, because you can. So if we look at the hipster languages, the Rubies, the Pythons, the Node.jses, the Rust, the Go, and then we look at the typical enterprise languages, so what we view as the enterprise, things like Java, COBOL, C, .NET, they can all DevOps. There's no reason they can't, because the technology you choose doesn't inhibit your ability to talk to another human being. It shouldn't. But the enterprise is often omitted. Enterprise software feels omitted from DevOps, to the point where someone literally coined the term enterprise DevOps to be something different than what all the hipster startups were doing. Big organizations feel left behind because big organizations have to change. And it's slow to change a big organization. But big organizations are left behind not because they know, or not because they can't. Right? They're not left behind because they can't. They're left behind because that they don't know they can. So we don't do a good enough job convincing big organizations, big enterprises, why this is a good idea. Big organizations are much more resilient to change than small startups because they've been burned in the past. They require testing, rigorous, statistical proof that this process works. And we have that now, but we didn't 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it was just a thing that made sense. It doesn't matter if you're 2 employees or 100,000. You can still DevOps. The only difference is the amount of time it takes to propagate across the organization. With 2 people, you can DevOps in an afternoon. With an organization of 100,000 employees, it may take 2 years. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. So let's talk about the final myth. DevOps is just a fad like Agile or Mainframes. How many people think this one is true? Okay. So mainframes were a data center technology stack. They were a type of way to run a server, basically. They were really popular because they were kind of the only thing. So when your sample size is 1, 100% of your sample size is true. But they were phased out as technology evolved. Servers got faster. Intel started making crazy fast processors. Storage got smaller. Electricity got cheaper. They went away. Or they're used only in legacy systems. But I don't think there's any startup out there that is looking to get into the mainframe management sector. Agile was a programming methodology. It was a process for how we manage the production and deployment of our code. It was how we schedule work. It was how we communicate about work. And we throw a little bit of Kanban on there, or Kanban, depending on how you pronounce it, to make it look pretty. But it turns out that Agile, coupled with pair programming and extreme programming, were really unhealthy for the individual. It encouraged unhealthy competition because you could look at a chart and see who was the most productive employee. So we're back to high school where everybody's ranked again. So we revert to those primal instincts of competition. Start working 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, so that we can be at the top of the burn down chart to win a prize that doesn't actually matter. DevOps, on the other hand, is an organizational ideology. So we have a technology, a methodology, and an ideology. An ideology is a way of thinking, right? A methodology is an implementation of that thinking, and technology is a vessel through which we promote that thinking. When you adopt an ideology, it doesn't change. Technology changes very, very rapidly, in fact. There's technology that exists today that did not exist at the start of this conference. Programming methodologies evolve. Very few people adopt Agile now. There are a lot of people still using it, but it's no longer the go-to for how we manage software projects. But ideologies stay the same. Or at least they're much more well-tested against time. Methodologies change every 3 to 4 years. Technology changes on a daily basis. But ideologies, they're 30 to 40 years. It takes 30 to 40 years for someone to come along and come up with a revolutionary idea that changes the way that people think. And I think the best example of that is the iPhone. It sounds weird because the iPhone's a technology, right? But it's not. Because when Steve Jobs got on stage that very first time and brought up that big, clunky, bulky iPhone and showed it to the world, he wasn't actually showcasing a smartphone. He wasn't actually showcasing the iPhone. He was showcasing the mobile future. He was showcasing the way that our lives are going to change by having the internet in our pocket. And it took 10 years, but we all have the internet in our pocket. We have high-speed internet in our homes. But when he got on stage, yes, he had a phone in his hand and he did some cool things, but that phone couldn't even send picture messages. That was a thing that other phones on the market could do for a long time. So why did it sell? Why is the iPhone still the most popular phone on the consumer market? It's because it's an idea. It's an ideology. He gave people something to believe in, the future. DevOps is a way to facilitate organizational prosperity and growth while increasing individual employee happiness along the way. So we are looking to optimize the organization. We want the organization to make money, or if you're a nonprofit, we want the organization to help as many people as possible. We want to have the biggest impact. But at the same time, we maintain a very careful balance between that and the individual employee's happiness. Because at no point in time should the prosperity of the organization be put in front of the prosperity of the individual, or the health or well-being of the individual. And I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds pretty awesome. So I hope it's not a fad. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any question you want to ask? No, thank you very much.
I think there's back.
I love your talk and the way you said about history. And I remember there was like Agile thing which said we should talk to each other. Then there were plenty of talks from testers saying like, please involve testers into developers' work. Please take us on. We want to do testing with you and be closer to you guys. And that was very, very popular at the time. Now there's ops coming to developers again, saying like, let's work together. Let's do it together. Devs going to ops. Let's do it together. Who is next? Marketing? Finance?
I think consulting. I think consulting is next because consultants work very closely with customers. They're on site. And I think having their insight brought on to the engineering teams and the operations teams saying, hey, our customers have this really big problem with the product. Could you please fix it? That's a really good vessel. I think it's either going to be consulting or like professional services consulting, or it's going to be the client. I think if you look at a lot of projects, like Kubernetes is open source. All of the projects I work on are open source. They're successful because we have direct access to the user. And you as a user can open a GitHub issue and say, hey, this isn't working for me. Can you please help? And the community can help, or the primary owners of the project can help. I think it's going to be one or the other.